Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining our monthly producer showcase. When Jason first brought the producer showcase idea to the table, I wanted to make sure that we had a connection with the drum and bass community. So, with that, we have Lee and Karen Kaplan, also known as Quadrant and Iris. They've been they have been setting Seattle on fire with D&B for over a decade, probably two for all I know. I will let them give you more info on their background, but thank you so much for coming here tonight to teach us the ways of the drum and bass.
Thank you so much for having us. And we appreciate you reaching out to the drum and bass community. You knew ahead of time that if you didn't, we would have just complained loudly on the internet, which is basically what drum and bass people do when we're not making tunes. What's going on? I'm Lee, aka Quadrant.
I'm Karen, also known as Iris.
And I don't know. Yeah, do you want us to do a little like mini bio, or just?
I just let him know maybe a little how long you've been doing it, maybe who you produce for.
Okay, we started about a year after we got married, so almost a decade. It's probably 9 years since we finished our first tune, which we signed to Metalheads, and then. Also, yeah, I guess usually we're working with Dispatch, Commercial Suicide, CIA, Hospital.
Sofa Sound, Guidance.
Sofa Sound, yeah, Guidance.
Basically, we've been lucky enough to have made friends with a lot of producers and DJs who are making moves. I guess nation and worldwide. Drum and bass is a style of music that's centered around Europe for the most part, and it's to the credit of all of the promoters in Seattle who have brought through all these amazing acts and let us meet them, show them our music, and somehow get signed by them. So we've been that's basically been our MO. I've been doing this since like the year 2000. Signed first tune in like 2004. I used to live in Philadelphia. Quadrant used to be 4 people. That's how I know Dave, who's behind the camera there. But I'm from here originally, and I much prefer the West Coast. Sorry, Philly.
Before D&B, Lee dabbled a bit in progressive trance.
I did. It's
he
true.
He does have one tune on vinyl.
Yep. A trance tune on vinyl. I've got a few more than that on. And
I think it was a Seattle-based label. Was Orange
yeah,
Plus.
Orange Plus. And Karen has a magnificent hard house collection on vinyl at home. We have 4 turntables at home. It's great. All right. So, and what we were going to do today is go through a track that we wrote with our friends JD and Greg, Ulterior Motive. JD came here in, what was it, January of last? No, December. December. I don't even know what fucking month it is. December of last year, he was playing some shows in the U.S., came up, spent a couple of days at our place, got in the studio.
He spent 24 hours at our place.
He spent 24 hours in our place. For factual accuracy, go to Karen. For fun stories and embellishment, also her, sometimes me. So yeah, so we had about 24 hours in the studio, which is not a lot of time, but we went from the skeleton of a tune to almost a finished track within that amount of time. So obviously, in that kind of scenario, you need to make the best use of your time. You need to prepare as much as possible so that when you're there together, you can get as much accomplished as possible. We'll talk about some workflow stuff. We'll talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of how we laid out the project, the signal path. Talk about kind of the work that we did ahead of time, the work we did afterwards. Is there anything else you want to say about like the preparation?
Yeah, I guess we'll just kind of go over kind of like if you've got somebody coming in like from out of town or somebody you don't see very often, kind of what you can do to help make things move a little quicker.
And I would say that it's not necessarily a handicap to have a limited amount of time. It's really easy to spend 5 months working on one tune, but it doesn't. There's a there's a point of diminishing returns where you're the second 3 weeks you spend on it's probably not going to be that much different than the first 3 weeks. There's a lot that you can learn in like the first amount, like a small amount of time, and if you get things accomplished quickly, you can move on and learn more hopefully on the next 5 tunes. You learn more by starting 5 tunes and finishing them than you do from working on one for 5x the amount of time.
So finish your tunes.
Yeah, finish your tunes. Even if you're not 100% happy with them, no one ever is. Get used to it. Finish your tunes. Finish your tunes. All right, so I'm uncomfortable in this chair. And it's not the chair. No. Oh, got it. I don't know how to sit in chairs. You all only see me out at clubs. You don't see me sitting in chairs, so you're not like, have you seen Lee in chairs? I don't know if he knows how to use them. Okay. All right, so here's our tune. It's called Intuition. and so on and so forth. So this is great. We're not even playing and we cleared the floor. No, it's totally.
And also streaming up in the living room.
Oh. I kid. But actually, I'm kind of impressed. Okay, so the plan that I had was kind of engineering focused, was to, basically go through this finished tune and talk about how we set everything up, peel back the curtain, show how we did, I guess the meat and potatoes of it. I got some notes here. I'm not like checking Facebook. I'm also checking Facebook, but oh my God, the app takes so long to open. Here we go. Okay, cool. So, yeah, as we mentioned beforehand, first thing we knew was JD's coming over. He's going to be here for 24 hours. Probably not going to get to work with him for a while because he spends half his time in Thailand and half his time in England. So this is really cool. We've got to get a lot done in a short amount of time. What do? First thing we did was come up with an idea. Get some drums, maybe get a bass line, really rough, doesn't sound like it's going to end up sounding. That's okay. You've got something to go by. So we did that.
Yeah, kind of one of the most important things when you are collabing with others and you have that limited time is first things first, get a vibe.
100%. Get a.
Well,
Yeah, we'll kind of discuss a little. We know JD's aesthetic, so we kind of had an idea of where we wanted to go. But sometimes if Lee and I just sit down together, we'll be like, okay, what kind of tune do we think we want to make? Do you make like a stepper, roller? Do you want to do, liquid,
foghorns?
Foghorns, yeah. And then we'll kind of go in that direction and build our drums based off of that. We'll start there.
Yeah, and what Karen means by a vibe too isn't just what kind of vibe we want to go for. We want it to be a liquid tune. It's when we say you've got a vibe down, it means you've got maybe 16 or 32 bars of something like a decent bass line, drums. You know how the track goes. You've got the meat of it down. You've got something where it's obviously not perfect, but you can see where it's going to go from there. And it might even transform after that, but you've got a vibe that everyone... And then, it also helps if you do the prep work, you come back the next morning and you play it, and you're like, that's still a vibe. If it's still a vibe the next morning, then, you're golden. All right, so, yeah, we did that, bounced out just a really preliminary version, sent it over to JD, and he was like, I don't know, mate, put an LFO on the bass line, maybe. We did that, and we're like, it's immediately 1,000 times better. That's why they pay you the big bucks. Point is, need a pop filter on this thing. By the time he got over to our place, we already had something to go off of. We weren't searching around, plunking around for a bass line or something. We were already kind of off to the races, and we were kind of in the meat and potatoes of it. The other thing is getting samples together, and oftentimes when you've got someone else coming to the studio, the best way that they can, kind of bring something to the table other than, their musical ability and their aesthetic and acumen and everything. It's just a folder full of samples. Hey, I got these samples for you. We're going to use these. Here's the raw materials that we can use to make these tracks.
Yeah, one of the best things about when we work with Kyle Kid Hops is he knows his samples inside and out. So he's always coming with a lot of great samples, a lot of great knowledge in that area of what we can get to build a tune off of.
100%. Yeah, Kyle is a freaking madman with the samples. He's very, very broad and deep, well of musical knowledge that he brings to the table. All right, so once we got that, we were at the rest of the tune. Are there any questions? So it's going to get a little engineering here. Drum and bass is a very kind of engineering-centric subgenre of music, or genre of music. And we've got tricks that we use and kind of techniques that we've developed over the years. We're going to show you how this tune was laid out, and I'll go through the project, and is there another microphone where people can ask questions? No, there's not. So feel free to ask questions. Yeah, okay. Yeah, ask questions early and often, because I'm going to be like pointing and clicking at an Ableton file and and nerding out on it. But I want us all to nerd out together, because the point here is knowledge transfer. It's not to show how cool we are. Clearly, that's not going to work. If I want a mic stand so I can use both hands. Not going to be programming. I'm good. Thank you. If I have to use more than my mouse hand, I'm definitely doing too much on the computer. Okay, so the way that we organize our... maybe? Should we? Probably. Karen's got all the good ideas. Ooh, this is the better chair, too. I know how to sit in this one. I just moved the computer, too, so this thing's probably broken again. All right, so top down, the way that we organize our projects signal path-wise is into drums and everything else. So everyone wants their tunes to be loud. You listen to... I don't know, who's the kids listening today? Skrillex? I don't get out much. I don't know. I just, to pick a... Goldie? Yeah, definitely. That's way more up to date. Sorry, G, I love you. Call me. No, but you listen to, tracks that are on Beatport, and you're like, these are really loud. These sound great. How do I get my tune super loud? And there's techniques you can use, but one of the things that everyone fights with is drums versus literally everything else in their mix down, right? So we actually separate our mixes, our bus routings into drums and stuff that's not drums. So I'm first going to play the instruments, or we'll start out here at the drop, right? Here's the instruments bus. Oh yeah, that's right, I played a DJ, so. Okay, and then just the drums. And one of the reasons is because processing-wise, we treat these very differently. Drums are very transient heavy. If we look at, I don't think I have an analyzer on here, but let's go look at Scopda. Mm-hmm.
On average, how many layers of drums do you use for a typical drum and bass track?
That is a really good question. The answer is...
Wait, the question was...
Oh.
How many layers of drums do you use?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and the answer is it varies. I'm going to go into a little bit more specifics of how we did the drums for this track. That can change depending on what strategy we're using for the track. And I can talk, when I talk about how we did the drums for this, which is somewhat different from...
Typically just one main one, and then you add extras.
The question is it one main one and then you add extras? Yes, and this is all a really good line of questioning, and I will hopefully answer all of those types of questions that you have, and you'll be able to ask more specific questions based off of that, based off of how we do this. So I'm gonna talk about that, but I just want to talk a little bit first about what are drums even, right? What? So get a oscilloscope if you don't have one. This one is free. I think AJ showed it to you the other week, right? This Vengeance Producer Suite scope. If you buy one issue of Computer Music Magazine, it's free. So, oops. Look at those fat, chunky drums. So something you're going to notice about, actually, let's see, we can freeze this. Oh my, for fuck's sake. Okay, so first thing you're going to notice, look at that red on the top and the bottom. These things are clipping to shit. That's
Clip
okay.
your drums.
Clip your drums. That is the first lesson here. You can clip your drums. You can actually get away with a surprising amount of clipping on your drums. The reason is clipping, I don't care if it's analog clipping or digital clipping, you hear that mostly as broadband noise, right? It fuzzes out. What does a snare drum sound like? I mean, there's more to it than that, but there's a lot of, noise in drums, and so you can actually get away with lopping the tops off of them a lot more than you would for any other sounds. And that's the primary reason that we separate our drums as well, and everything else. So everything else... The question is, does that change the sound of your drums, or does that just make them louder? Yes. So you can get away with a lot of clipping and be able to tell very little difference in the character of your drums. Okay, let's go back to the drums here. We've got...
I will say a lot of people will say things like, don't clip your drums. You're going to hear that a lot from... I don't know who's saying this, but I feel like... But
people on the internet, they're wrong.
But the difference is between the people, that are making great music, like Mefuse, Icicle, Break, all of those people, they're clipping their drums. If somebody tells you otherwise,
they're
wrong.
So...
Sorry, are you talking about clipping the actual bus or just slamming a brick wall limiter?
Clipping. Get that limiter shit out of your head. So no, other people use brick wall limiters, and the reason I don't tend to prefer them is that they've got attack and decay stages, right? And so they're gonna do stuff to the transients on your drums, and you get, in my opinion, more control with something like a clipper. So you can actually get away with just clipping stuff straight out the master bus, depending on, a bunch of other stuff that I'll kind of get into later. You can get more control over it by using a plugin like V-Clip or K-Clip or something like that. What that basically does is just, you're being more deliberate about the clipping that you're doing. So here I've got, for the love of God. Oops, okay, yeah, this is the drum out. So... fuck? What do I have this on? Oh, because I froze it. Did someone tell me? Okay, so you notice how you're seeing the exact same thing here now, except you're not seeing the red on the top and the bottom, because now we're clipping it on purpose. And we can use V-Clip here to, let's see what happens here. We can do like a transfer function to make it softer. So you can actually hear what that does. Like if we have like soft clipping versus hard clipping, you can actually hear the soft clipping more. You can also take the ceiling down. You notice how long it took for it to sound really fuzzy and gross? So what we had beforehand, you can actually take, so let's take a utility plugin here, and I guess we could have just lowered the input. Fuck it, I'll do it the hard way. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this thing down by, what am I turning it down by? 10 dB. This thing insists on starting here. All right, cool. So Let's turn off V-clip. Apparently, I was clipping my drums beforehand. I think I'm actually clipping them on a bus like in front of this. So when I freeze the scope, you can actually see, like, I've turned this whole thing down, but the drum hits themselves are super fat. They're not spending a lot of time in this really spiky area right here, which is just the transient, which can actually get really loud. That part of the waveform isn't going to do you a whole lot of favors. You can get away with a whole lot of just lopping the tops off of those, and that's how you get really fat, punchy drums that take up a lot of the, kind of sonic space. This snare here is going to basically, 0 dB, and it's spending a lot of time in the snare body just, being a fat snare. Same with this kick right here, right? And, you can get into trouble with what happens when this kick and this snare, compete with all the other stuff that's going on in your mix. Perfectly valid concerns, and we'll get to techniques for dealing with that. But the lesson we want to take away from this is you can get away with a lot of clipping on your drums. Pay attention to the shape and the envelope of them. Listen when you're doing it. You can probably get away with more than you think you can, and even if you're digitally clipping something like this, right? This variable soft knee, like this is just any sample that goes over this is just right off the top. It's going to sound very relatively transparent for sounds that have a lot of broadband noise content, which is almost all drums. Kicks, depending on how long your kick is, that can be more tonal. Same with toms and things like that. But when you're talking about especially drum and bass, where the hits are kind of very short, compressed, and noisy, this is how you get drums sounding big. Any questions on that so far? Yeah. So the question is that similar to doing preparation ahead of time and editing your sounds, your drums, and what have you? It can be. Generally, what we just saw right there is an envelope control, which is changing the actual shape of the body of the drum. Usually, that happens kind of further back in the process. But the more preparation work you do to get some, so for instance, if you have a kick that's got a huge attack on it, and you just lop that off and then resample that kick and then put it in the mixer or put it in the sampler, just play it like that. You're saving yourself work. You're not going to have to kind of fix that problem with it for afterwards. So that can be useful for sure. All right. So then there's this whole other category of sounds that do not take kindly to clipping in much the same way, right? So this is your basses, your guitars, your vocals, your donks. We all put donks on our tracks. So let's hear what happens if we try to take V-clip and put it on this. We'll just do digital clipping right here. Actually, you can barely hear it until you do 80%, so that sounds kind of like crap. But you still want all that stuff to be relatively, volume, what am I trying to say? Dynamics controlled. You want, you don't want there to be huge variations in, loud and quiet, unless you're doing that as an aesthetic choice, right? You still want control over all the things that are going into that bus. So, using compressors, limiters, tools that are meant to preserve the sonic character of the sounds that you're putting into it. that's more appropriate for instruments like that. And we separate our signal path into drum out, like you just saw, and instrument out. And instrument out, everything goes through a limiter. I've personally been using this W1. It's like a free clone of Waves L1. It used to only be available as an audio unit, and now it's a VST2. I think cross-platform too. I've never compared it with L1, but it's a surprisingly good limiter for a surprisingly wide variety of program material. And we own a lot of limiters. We've got like FabFilter L Pro L2, and I actually get better results a lot of the time with this. That probably means I like don't know how to use Pro L2. But we go with what's easy and what works. So basically, drums going through one bus, just clipping out the master, or clipping ahead of the master, and then this bus is limited. And there's some other level control stuff that we do here that I'm not going to talk about right this second, but we'll talk about it in just a little bit. Any questions? Yeah, question is, do you just limit it 0, -1? I just limit it 0. I guess, oops, wrong channel and plugin. Batting 1,000 here. Yeah, I just limit it 0. This thing doesn't oversample, so intersample peaks aren't a huge deal. If I'm really worried about those, I guess I could limit using this and then turn it down by however much I feel is necessary. Also, I suck at gain staging. Like, I'm trying to get better, but like, pro tip, you can actually clip any channel inside of Ableton, like by 1500 dB, and then turn it down in another channel and get all of your peaks back. It's a 32-bit floating point mix engine. So you still have to worry about levels because a lot of plugins care about what level you're hitting things at, especially if it's like an analog modeling thing and they've, kind of like modeled like distortion, like nonlinearities, characteristics, things like that. But you can be really fast and loose with your gain staging inside of Ableton, and then all that matters is what actually comes out of the end, what you actually print to disk. And the extra special trick is it might not even matter then because you can print out at 32-bit, which will enable you to basically turn the file that you bounced out down and get all of your peaks back. So if you're ever...
Mastering engineers hate us.
They do. Using this one weird trick, mastering engineers hate us. I'm sure this isn't what JD does. He's probably like, oh, these motherfuckers. That's fine because he masters stuff. Yeah, but I wanted to touch on that because that's kind of a common misconception. Never clip your channels. Doesn't matter if you clip your channels. You can't actually clip channels inside of modern DAWs. It's not a thing. So I'm going to go into how we made these drums. So within each of these kind of groups, we've got like nested groups. So we've got all drums here. And then with all drums, we've got drums and percussion that we kind of keep separately. And we use groups like this to organize things, both just to, keep everything straight. Kind of give a little bit of hierarchy to our projects, but then also for the signal path, because the drums are all like similar signal-wise. The percussion kind of different in character. Oftentimes, you just want to like slap a compressor or something over all your percussion. You don't want to treat it nearly as harshly as oftentimes you have to do with your main drums. So let's solo just the drums here. So this is the main break of the tune. Kind of this is the armature. This is what we hang everything off of in this track, right? So everything, the kick and the snare in particular, but also the groove and the hats and everything need to be hitting in just the right way, and that's a goddamn pain in the ass with drum and bass.
And this is kind of how we'll set up, like, if we're starting a tune, we always start with the drums, we always start with the break. Before we do anything else, we try to get the vibe off of the drums, and then we add in the bass, and then kind of everything else. I've seen people do it other ways, but for us, that's never worked out.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever started with like a Rhodes lick or something, and then ended up in a place where we had like a finished track. I mean, other people can 100% do it, but we've literally never done it.
Outside of like working in 24-hour time limits, do you guys ever work in a super loop, or do you just track out the entire like just the whole pattern?
The question is, do we ever work in a super loop, or do we track out the pattern? I don't know what a super loop is, but I'd like to buy one. Can you tell me? Oh, got it.
No, so like from what I understand, a super loop is like when you just have like a 32-bar loop and you just make a million fucking layers.
Yeah,
Then you add it over the entire like 5-minute period and start to take stuff away.
sure.
Sorry. So yeah, what we do is we'll do that kind of the drums. We'll get the bass in, and then we copy it out. We might add in like some extra samples and stuff to get like a little bit more of a vibe. But yeah, we get that 32-bar loop in, and then we copy paste, which is also a really nice way of feeling like maybe your tune's mostly done, even though it's not even close.
Yeah, that's so, to your point, I am not as comfortable as I'd like to be working in session view, and especially just like recording stuff. I tend to think of things a little bit like more linearly. So we've tried to work in session view and basically do, a kind of super loop, as you describe it, type strategy, where you've got all of your like percussion change ups and everything, like all the different variations. You can basically sequence them out almost in real time if you want to.
I think it's more of a techno thing.
Yeah, that I do actually think that works better in four on the floor or like genres that are more loop based. And even though we try to have somewhat of that kind of aesthetic when we write tunes a lot of the time, D&B does tend to be very linear and have kind of regimented tropes for how the track needs to be laid out, what touch points you need to hit, where people are DJs are expecting for things to happen. But to Karen's point, the real takeaway there is it's a lot easier staring at 6 minutes or 5 minutes of a loop, even if you know that you need to add stuff or take stuff away from the loop, than it is staring at a blank sequencer. A blank sequencer is it's death. Nothing. I mean, personally, I just look at that and I'm like, oh, I got so much work to do.
I also think so I think you can kind of see we've got little markers up there. So we've got the drop, we've got the breakdown, you can add those. So we'll know we've got little markers every
every 16 bars here.
Yeah, every 16, so we know where we need to do something. Yeah, something's going to change here, here, and here. You can, maybe we'll say push the track in 44 bars or whatever, and say this is where our intro is gonna be this long, then we're gonna have this much, and then we're gonna do a breakdown, and then this much, and you can add and take away as you need.
And if we were really dope, we'd put that in our template, but I still right-click and make every single one of those by hand. Each one of those is an artisan bespoke cue point. Command R named by hand, except for the ones that are numbers. Artisanal, it's the 17 is number 4 for some reason. Whatever, it's fine. All right, so drums, right? Drums in this track, we actually used a VST called Addictive Drums for the main drums. And we don't do this a whole lot. A lot of the time what we do is take drum loop, some sort of breakbeat sample, put it in something like Recycle, chop it up, and use a drum rack, kind of have that as the main loop. Layer, kicks and snares over it. But we kind of got away with doing this with addictive drums, and we've used this more often lately. This is what just the addictive drums part sound like. And it's pretty damn good. I'm going to take all the processing off of it. We kind of arrived at this signal path by accident-ish. It's not that we didn't know what we were doing. It's just that I personally didn't know like exactly how well this signal path would come out. So, all right. Oh, really? Are you gonna like kick us out? Okay. Really? Got it. Okay. I'll go more quickly. So it's cool, but it sounds more like live drums. I'm not gonna say it sounds like a potato, but it sounds a lot more like potato-ish, than it did beforehand. So first thing we strapped on here is actually, what did we strap on here? Slate distressor. This is I guess the FG Stress. This is a really good model of a Empirical Labs distressor compressor, which is both a distortion and compression, and you can slam drums through it. We are mixing the drums. We're mixing it in at about 77%. So a little bit of like parallel compression here. There's like some of the original drums poking through. Next thing we've got is a EQ that did not survive. Let's see. This keeps on like. So I guess we got like a lot more like 200-ish hertz beforehand. This was basically meant to take the body of the snare, which is, I'm going to say it looks like a finger. Taking it out here at like 248 hertz. Yeah, finger, and it was just a little bit too donk. And we didn't like that donk, or at least I didn't, so, I put that on. So then we put FabFilter Saturn on it, which is a multi-band saturator, and used it both as kind of an EQ, so you can, break things up into multiple bands and just straight up turn up and down the bands. So like, it kind of works like a multi-band EQ, but then, there's a little bit of drive like on the individual bands as well. And I'm just going to A/B that real quick. And then there's this RX 950, which is using that for just a little bit more grit. It's a preamp emulator. It's supposed to sound like the one of the old Akai samplers. Unclear whether that just made it louder versus better. It's definitely in the final tune. So I put that on, and then I put a K clip right after it. Quality at 32x for some fucking reason, but and that was so those taken together. I think it fattened it up a little bit, but I'm not going to say 100% whether it did, because I would have to level match. Pro tip: things that are louder sound better 100% of the time, so you could be fooling yourself. If you're ever wondering whether something is like doing whatever sound you're working on any favors, you've got to make them sound almost exactly the same loudness, and then A/B them, and then you'll actually be able to tell. But also YOLO. So the bus that those are all going to, there's this Spectre, which is just like a, let's see. It's like a parallel EQ and or like a parallel EQ/saturator. It like saturates these bands, so I'm using that just to put like a little bit of top end sheen on there, and apparently added some, what's this, 600 hertz for some reason. I did it because some reason, I don't remember. I thought it sounded better at the time. And then some ozone imager to give it a little bit of stereo je ne sais quoi. And it sounds better on headphones. And that's basically like all the drums for this tune. Now, we do have some loops in here that are so places where we've got like, little snare rolls, things like that. And these are just so this one is Addictive Drums also. And then what I call Cool 16th guy here. Let's hear this dude. Or let's not. So this is just a break that JD brought along, and it's just kind of a rolling like drum loop that I think he originally did in Addictive Drums, and we just put this in here, and we use this for the parts that roll. You'll notice there are parts here that are really rolly, and then there's parts that are more steppin', because they don't have, nearly as many kind of 16th note guys. They don't have those snare rolls. And we use that for contrast, right? So there's a lot of this kind of, 16th note stuff going on here. Then when it drops into this real, just kind of, stepping vibe. And it was Jay that told us we needed to do that, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think I remember that.
DLR heard an early version of the tune and said, sounds good, but, which is, which all your best friends say. And yeah, he had the really good suggestion that, at certain parts of the track, drop it out into, like take parts out of it, things that you thought actually added to it, take them out, and it actually helped the impact, which is something that we didn't do a lot, I think, before this.
Yeah, I think before this we would just kind of change things. So, we wouldn't be taking away, but we might change, like the drum pattern there or something that like, I mean, this might turn into something else here and then turn into something else there.
Totally.
Yeah, but also kind of what you kind of take away from this is a lot of, doing things different, as we said, like in the feedback session, doing things every 8 to 16 bars. And in particular, I don't know, were you going to talk about like the snares? Like stuff like this really keeps the tunes moving. So when you're doing things like doing those rides and you're layering like those little bongos or like this little break, it'll add to the energy and really keep your tune moving forward. A couple reference tracks that I like that do this really well are Jubei's Patience.
Yeah, Jubei and D-Bridge.
Jubei and D-Bridge, yeah. Also, the 9, where you just see that just smashing little like crashes and rides, and that's I think something that a lot of people end up missing in their drum and bass tunes specifically. That's one of my top feedback to people is get some rides in there and change them every 8 to 16 bars.
Rides, shakers, tambourines, triangles, congos, bongos. There's congos and bongos. I don't know how to speak. Yeah, there are so many colors that you can put in your palette there, and they all add something. And it is really that kind of detail work. I would say that, and also transition sounds, flourishes, little swooshy bits. When you take them away, you notice that they're gone, but it's very difficult sometimes to notice that they're actually there because they're meant to support everything else, everything that's taking center stage. But you'll notice that something sounds unfinished if all of that, kind of armature. I keep using this word armature, and I don't. Scaffolding? Is that what I mean? Scaffolding is what I mean, and I. I don't think I've used that word in the last 2 years, and yet tonight I've twice. Yeah, if all that scaffolding kind of isn't in place. So,
Can I ask a question?
sure.
So back to the louder isn't necessarily better. Like, what monitor levels do you monitor at different levels? Like,
As loud as possible because it's better. No, I don't know, something that you can comfortably listen to for a long period of time without. Okay.
The question was about monitoring
Yes.
levels.
Sorry. Thanks. Sorry. Questions about monitoring levels. What monitoring levels do you suggest? It depends on what you're doing. If you're trying to get a vibe down and you got 3 people in the studio, it helps to stand a little bit further away from the speakers so you can get it loud and have a lot of sub and get everyone excited about what's going on. At that point, your main job is to establish a vibe, and it's very difficult to get a vibe with quiet music. If you're trying to dial everything in and get it sounding good, you're going to need something where you can make accurate judgments. You're familiar with the Fletcher-Munson curve? This is basically equal loudness curve. The long and the short of it is we not only do things sound better when they're louder, but frequency response or sensitivity of the human auditory system actually changes with the level of the sound. One of the reasons that things that are loud sound better to us is because we get a flatter response curve from our ears when sounds are louder. The mid-range gets less dipped out. You can actually hear the low end and the high end better. So it's sometimes difficult to make accurate judgments about things in the mix if you A, only listen super loud, but also B, don't listen at a bunch of different volumes. So it can be really useful to listen to the whole entire mix at very low volume, because then the loudest things are going to kind of poke out at you. It can also be a lot really useful to listen, pretty loud, because you're going to, get a, I guess, I don't want to say accurate, but a different perspective on the dynamic range of all of the different pieces of the track. And you're going to hear things that are lower in the mix that you wouldn't necessarily notice.
Case in point, we just got some feedback. Well, it was a couple months ago from Ant from Dispatch that we somehow had some kind of double kick sound in one of the tunes that we had sent him, and he was like, "It sounds like shit." But
Just really great feedback. You always want to hear that from the label boss.
We didn't hear it, but as soon as I played it on laptop speakers, which is a lot quieter than we'd been listening to it, it stuck out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, lots of different speakers. They're not all going to tell you the truth, but they're all going to tell you something, and people are listening to things on any number of different monitoring situations. So,
and that's kind of when the A-being comes in. So, a lot of the times we'll go to, play a tune at a club, and Lee will be like, "I don't know," but
Baltic Room.
You can't use that. Yeah, you can't use that as your only point of reference. So find a couple of tunes that from people that whose mix downs you really respect, and use those to double check.
Question is, do we prefer closed or open back headphones? Our studio headphones are open back, so I prefer those because I don't want to buy another pair. That being said, I think open back, okay, I don't build headphones, so if if someone who actually does wants to correct me here, that's cool. I think engineering-wise, it's more difficult to get a flatter response out of closed headphones because of the sound actually bouncing around inside the the ear cup. So they've got to do more backflips there. You get more isolation out of closed back headphones, but if your studio's already quiet, then hopefully that's not as much of an issue. If you've well. You know what? Love the headphones you're with. Yeah, I think I read that on a greeting card somewhere. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to touch on before moving on from drums is that right here I've got, okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. Drums take up a lot of headroom and space in the mix. They're very pokey, as we saw on the analyzer or on the oscilloscope earlier. And you have to make drums coexist with all this shit, right? All this. And to put a little bit finer of a point on it, let's look at the scope right after the limiter here. I know how to drag and drop. I've been using computers for years. All right. I'm gonna sample that for my self-affirmation tape. Okay, cool. So not quite using up like all the headroom. This is actually fairly dynamic for a, after limiter mix, so we're like doing a pretty good job here, but there's still, we don't really have a whole lot of room to like fit literally everything else in, right? And this is with just the bass line going. Now look what happens when we bring the stabs in. Okay, so a lot of stuff is competing for headroom, right? And if you put them both together, I expected to make a more like a better point with that. It actually sounded okay, like on these speakers and in this room. You can get away with a lot by like putting speakers in a room and just sort of letting natural reverb do its thing, which is another reason. I'm not going to say mixing in headphones is something you need to do all the time, but definitely listen in headphones because you can hear, especially clipping, a lot better. It's going to give you a skewed perspective on your stereo field and reverb. You're going to tend to want to under stereo thing or underpan and also put in not as much reverb as you actually need on studio monitors. So it's important to listen on both. Point being, when the kick hits, especially, but also sometimes the snare, things can fuzz out, especially if you're running up against the limitations of digital audio, 0 dB full scale. That's if you bounce it out like through your sound card, if you don't do 32-bit and turn it down ahead of time. So we make judicious use of side chaining, basically, for the loudest sounds in our drum mix, and we side chain those against the limited version of everything else in the track. So we've limited all of this stuff. We're looking at this here. Limited all this. And what we want to do is when the kick hits and when the snare hits, carve out a little bit of space for each one respectively, so that you don't have any audible clipping. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the kick and the snare that you're using, as well as the nature of everything else in your track, but especially the bass line, they're either going to be able to make friends or they're really going to fight each other in the frequency spectrum. And there's... Okay. The bass lines, whatever.
No, we have to talk about our analog heat.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We spent money on it, so we have to talk about it.
We love it. We highly recommend it.
Yeah, just buy an analog heat.
Just go buy an analog heat, and it's just gonna make your bass lines like
sick,
100 times better.
If your bass lines aren't sick and you want them to be sick, get an analog heat. So anyway, what we want to do is, carve out space in the mix when the kick hits and when the snare hits. And what we're using in this particular track for that is a plugin called Volume Shaper. And that lets you trigger via MIDI an envelope that you can use. This like a volume envelope, right? And it's actually going to turn the volume all the way down and then, back up. And it's going to last for, this is 1/8 note, right? So that's about like how long is this the... This is the kick, and then we've got another one for the snare. Not very scientific here. We just kind of like drew different. These are presets that I've had forever, and they seem to work. But okay, a couple of things. First off, going to. So I'm going to unsolo here really quickly. Okay, so you can actually see this at work right here, where everything except for the drums are actually being carved out by the kick here. And it happens really quickly, but it basically makes room for this whole entire kick transient in here, right? So, and then happens again right here, right? So you can kind of see this, like if you looked at this, actually we've got here. So we got like the before and after here. You don't see, like you see, some things in here which are just, due to like how the bass line looks. But there's extra little divots in here that are caused by, are there? Am I lying? I know there are because I've got it like, I've got it on here. And it's also possible that I've actually got volume shaper on the bass ahead of that, so it's actually putting that like a similar envelope to that, like but even more so on other different sounds. So I think that might be the cause of like the fact that we've already got stuff that looks like it's being carved out here. But basically, if you want to get things loud and you also if you want to get things loud and also have a lot of bass, something's got to give. And this is one of the ways that you do that. People have various strategies for doing this. One of the ways you can do it is like literally drawing in volume automation or like having automation clips or something like that and just doing it manually. You get a lot of control that way. Ain't nobody got time for that shit. We've got a kick trigger track here that's basically just MIDI that's routed to, volume shaper. See me after class for like how to actually do that in Ableton. It's, not super complicated. We got that for the kick and for the snare. It's the next best thing I've found to actually like doing volume automation. Another way you can do it is just with sidechain compression. A lot of people do that. One of the problems with that is it's really easy to hear it. Sometimes you can use that as an aesthetic, but if you want it to be more transparent, you can use something like volume shaper, and the really big thing here is it's multi-band. So we've got a low band and a high band here, and the high band, at least on this for the kick, isn't actually doing anything. So it's only the low end that's being scooped out. So when the kick is hitting, the low end gets scooped out, but you don't notice because the kick's got low end in it. And so only one thing is existing right there at the same time. Same with the snare. We've got, and you can play around with it. Sometimes you're going to need to like do a low, mid, and high because there's like a lot of crap in there that's, if you've got like a real kind of like mid-range snare, you've got like, I don't know, a lot of white noise on the kick or something. I don't know why you do that, but maybe you did. So that is, that's how we...
You want to show us analog heat real quick, and then we cut you off.
We did not bring it with us.
We didn't bring her. We didn't bring her analog heat, but I can briefly go over kind of how we did the bass line. So this is the bass channel right now, which is actually muted. This is what the bass sounded like originally. This is a bass line we did, I think, using a couple of instances of Yuhi Diva, which is a super amazing...
Buy all the Yuhi things. You can't go wrong. Also, if you're going to want to put a Hoover in your tune, this is the one to use.
It
It's
has
called the Joey Beltram. What is
the
it? Joey
Beltram Hoover, I think, is
Beltram
the
Hoover. I think that's the preset.
yeah. There's a amazing Hoover Mentasm preset on here. It's got like I can't. I don't have a lot of time, so I can't go into it. Diva's amazing. Use it. And
All the Yuhis.
all the
all the
Yuhi
Yuhis.
stuff. Yeah, and so we've got that one. It's you
Dash.
you dash he.
Yeah.
So we've got the mid range here. And then we've also got a layer here, which is just the sub. It's using the same synth, which means you can use the same LFO on it and get them to kind of groove the same way. You could write a book on different ways to get bass lines to like both layer and make friends with each other. We don't have a whole lot of time. So the bass line started sounding like that. And in the finished product, it sounds like this. The question is, what did we add to make all those things down there? And the answer is fucking magic.
The analog heat.
So we actually had to do surprisingly little here. So what we did first off for the bass is we put it through some limiters, and we used we used an erosion effect, which is great to kind of like add some noise to like the upper end. So yeah, we've got Diva going through some FabFilter Saturn. Analog Heat is a little box made by Electron. It's like $800. It's got 8 different kinds of analog distortion and a multi-mode filter on it. No, it's just like it's kind of similar size of like the Digitact. It's a little thing that sits on your desk, and you've got a little cutoff knob, and you just turn it, and like cool shit happens. So what really blew us away is that how just getting one small piece of kit like that can kind of open you up to a whole array of just neat, happy accidents and sounds. But one of the things about that is it's, you can't like send 18 tracks through, 18 different instances of the analog heat, right? You've only got one of them. So we bounced to audio. You'll actually see in this bass track right here, we've got this thing as an external audio effect. So we sent it through there, put it through, some other stuff, like, I guess, just like a little bit of EQ. I don't... Archaeology, it doesn't really matter. Point being, we had to bounce that out to audio, and a lot of the passes that we did here are in real time with, both changing the distortion effects, but then also doing things like filter automation. And by like, finger quotes with automation, what I mean is I was tweaking the filter while we were going, yeah, sick. And then we recorded it, and that's what happened, and that's what you have in audio, and you commit. And it's cool because now you've got the audio, and you've committed, and you don't have to make any more decisions about that anymore. So if you listen to this, so I've got like a little bit more stuff happening here, but that's what it sounded like coming out of the analog heat, but it's crunchy as fuck. And you put like a little bit of chorus and some reverb on it, and it sounds amazing. So you go to, see like, I call this low pass bass sauce layer. So that's, Quattro mod, and so that's what it sounded like through the analog heat. Still like really decent, right? Like, I mean, just like a lot of like cool harmonics for stuff to grab onto. Fuzz it out just a little bit, and then put it through Valhalla Room. Sean Costello, native Seattleite, lives here, charges $50 for each one of his plugins. Buy all of them, give him all your money. They're all amazing.
Oh, really good, really easy to use.
Yeah, it's Valhalla DSP. Right. So this track here is the one that's got all the sub on it. And that doesn't actually have any additional effects on it. This is that whole thing, wideband, basically the bottoms and the tops just through the analog heat. And then we take, we've got just these like different little, I'm calling like sauce layers, where it's like, you just put like other different sauce on it. So bandpass bass right here, right? So this is actually like a different automation pass that we did through the analog key because it's got a bandpass filter on it. So why not dial in a little bit more distortion and just do that? It's fun. You're turning a knob. I mean, and then, you know, you do that, you do just a different pass for each one of these. And they've each got, you know, they each sound similar, but they're a little bit different because it's, you know, just a schlub turning a knob, right? And it's fun. It's like live performance. You know, we get so into like taking envelopes and, you know, changing them here and like making everything perfect. But, you know, you can do this with something like the analog key. You can do something, you know, just getting a push or just getting, you know, a few knobs to turn, and you know, with like a controller to turn in the studio. I'm like really excited about knobs. And you know, you add kind of a different aspect, like performance-based aspect to it. And it makes things more fun and ultimately makes for better music. There's a bunch of other shit in here that y'all can ask me about later if you want. Are there any additional questions from the room, like things that we didn't cover that you wish we had? Things that you wish we hadn't covered? Yeah, so we did that
You
first.
can always ask later in the group.
Yeah.
Where can we hear your stuff?
SoundCloud.com/Iris or SoundCloud.com/Quadrant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got there early.
No, somebody else said the Iris name and did not use that account, so SoundCloud gave it to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's got links to all our socials. Thank you.